So awesome. So moving on to the next talk, another lightning talk. It's from Ishan, who's a tech enthusiast. Basically, loves to explore anything around tech, anything that runs on electricity. So he's an active open source contributor as well. Does HackerRank as well. Are you at HackerRank? Yeah. So he works at HackerRank as well. So Ishan, I'll give it over to you to introduce yourself and all.
Thank you. Let me just get this up on the screen. Yeah. I have to press this one or this one?
Don't worry.
Okay. I'll do without this. Yeah, it's fine. Cool. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you? I was going to start with hello, folks, but since I'm in Chennai, I'll do it in a South Indian style. This is the first time I'm in South India, and Vanakkam. I hope I pronounce this correctly. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be taking a journey into web animations, how web animations came into the picture, how it all started back in 1987. And where we are headed next. I know this is supposed to be a lightning talk, so I'll just put 10 minutes on the clock, and I'll take this up as a challenge. Let's see if we can get this going. Okay, timer has started. So I think, first of all, it becomes customary that, I should introduce myself. I know I look way cooler in that picture over there. That's because of Photoshop and a cool friend of mine who owns a DSLR. But yeah, I'm Ishan. I'm a final undergraduate. I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's in computer science, and I'm working as an intern at HackerRank. And I'm an app developer, a web developer, and sometimes I do post some crazy stuff on Dribble as well. And I've been working with the web for almost 8 years now. I started in 7th grade because of a breakup. I wanted to create something cool for my crush. And yeah, I just love building cool stuff on the internet, and that's pretty much about it. Oh shit, I just realized that this is getting live streamed as well, so all my relatives will get to know that I had a breakup in 7th grade. But yeah, before jumping to the actual topic, I really want all of us to understand the importance of micro-interactions, why something like web animations or micro-interactions is even important, right? So I just did a random Google search, and this is literally the first thing that came up. I'm literally reading from the first search result itself. Micro-interactions are events which have one main task, a single purpose, and they're found all across your device and within apps. Now, how do you define this task? How do you define this single purpose, right? And while I was searching for that, this is what I came across. This is a blog post by Vamsi where this is how he puts it. Their purpose, micro-interactions, their purpose is to delight the user, to create a moment that is engaging enough, welcoming, and they will say it, the most important part, human. And I'm not sure how many of you still remember seeing up these dial-up connections back in those days, Windows XP. This was my era, when I started in school, when I went through that breakup. This is how I connected to the internet. There were no fiber optics, nothing. And early on, browsers were really designed for all of these animations rather than scrolling. They were designed to be mere document viewers, where people can share research papers and share information and everything else. And the first sort of animation that we actually had in web was GIFs. These were introduced back in 1987. It was mostly used by companies to, animate or kind of like rotate their logos. If you have seen those screensavers in Windows XP, those kind of animations. And now we use it for sharing memes on WhatsApp, of course. And back when browsers were still at war, there were not a lot of cross-standard platforms to support, to be honest. And the web was ripe and young. And web developers wanted to create some cool interactive web apps and games. And this is when Flash came into the picture. And I remember this one particular website, miniclip.com. I used to play a lot of Flash Plays games over here. If you have any nostalgia, I know this doesn't work anymore. Because while Flash was a great technology, it went against one single core fundamental principle of the web, which was to be open and accessible. And to cut a long story short, Flash support has been deprecated across all major browsers, and Adobe put a patch to it back in 2020. But here's where things get interesting. The first time, right, we ever got a framework or something of that sort was something called SMIL, Synchronized Multimedia Integration Language. I know it sounds a mouthful, but this was introduced back in 1998. And this was mainly used to animate SVGs. This was the first sort of language that we had, in order to style web pages or HTML pages. And then for the next few years, things remained pretty stagnant. until 2009. I think this was around iPhone 4S release, and there was a twinkling in Steve Jobs' eye. He was like, dude, we need to make the web look cool on phones as well. But since, because of memory limitations, they couldn't really put a Flash player on an iPhone, on a Safari browser. So they released these specs for CSS animations and transitions. But, you know, Apple being Apple, they really didn't go through a standards process or any standards committee. They just laid it out in the open. And that's how we got CSS animations and transitions. Meanwhile, the browser that we all hate, Internet Explorer, the folks in this team, they were like, dude, how can we cope up with all three of these? Now they had to support SMIL, then CSS animations and CSS transitions. So there was a state of urgency and a need of standardization as well. So this is what they came up with. They came up with something called the Web Animations API, which comprises of all three of these in one single umbrella. The Web Animations API is based on actually two key things: timing and animation, basically the when and the what. Let me give you an example. Let's assume that you have this image of a boat and you want to add a fade-in animation. So you'll define the state something like this, right? Let's say at 0 seconds, the opacity should be 20%. And after 8 seconds, this is a very lengthy fade-in transition. After 8 seconds, the opacity can be 100%. So you define these two, and now our browsers are smart enough to calculate every single position in between, in the middle. So the first one and the last one which we defined, these particular frames, these are known as key frames. Now I can't wait to jump into the editor and show you some really cool stuff, some cute cat videos maybe. I'm here on CodePen. I hope everyone can read the code. And I hope all of you are familiar with CSS animations to some extent. I'll just write some basic code. This is a CodePen that I created for, so I just have a cat over here which has 2 eyes, and I want to make sure that the cat can blink its eyes. So let's get into this. Is this mic working? Okay, this is not. So I'll scroll down, and first of all, we need to annotate, add the create keyframes and the animation name. Oh, this is working? Hello. Okay, this is working. So I'll just write, at 0%, the height should be 0%. So I'm trying to animate the eyelids. And at 50%, the height should be 100%. And at 100%, shut up, Bixby. And 100%, the height should be 0% again. And now I need to actually sync up this animation with the particular eyelid itself. So I'll just use a CSS animation property. I just defined the blink, like that's animation name and the duration. And it worked. Getting back to the presentation, I had to do this quickly. Sorry, I didn't get the chance to explain the code because we are running on a clock. And so what we just wrote right now, right? These were CSS animations, since practically we were writing CSS only. But if you notice one thing closely, we always had a start and an end state. Like what should happen when the animation is at 0%, what should happen when the animation is at 50% and 100%, that same thing. Because of this reason, they are also called state animations. But what if you want to make your cat interactive? Let's say like whenever I click on the cat's face, it should blink its eyes. Or something like this, right? So what I'm saying is like, how can we create stateless animations? So the first thing that comes to your mind is when I mentioned click, right? Anyone has any idea, by the way, how can we create something like this using like a click, like trigger the animation on a click? Exactly. The first thing, that's exactly what the Web Animations API is all about. Now let's get back to into that example again, and let's try recreating this using JavaScript. I just have 2 references, and so I haven't written anything in CSS now for the animation part. I just have 2 references, one for the face and the eyelids. Now what I'll do is I'll define an array. Keyframes is equal to height 0%. I'll just do the same thing which I did over there, and then height 100%, and then back to 0% again. Now what I'll do is, since eyelids is an array, I'll just use the first one, eyelids of 0, and then I'll use the animate method. I'll pass the keyframes and then a couple of options. One is duration, and let's see. Now our cat is winking at us. It feels very weird. Let's try to fix that. Face.add event listener, I'll just add the click event which you just mentioned. So now it accepts a callback, and now I'll iterate through all of the eyelids, the left and the right one, and then I'll call that animate method again. Eyelid.animate, keyframes, and this duration is supposed to be an object, and I'll pass it as 1000 milliseconds. Let's try clicking on the cat and let's see if it works. Yeah, it worked. It's kind of like purring a cat on its head, and it's blinking its eyes. It's very cute. Now this is a transcript of what we just wrote. But if you notice one thing closely, what basically we are doing is just calling this animate method, and we are passing keyframes and options in that one. What's interesting is that under the hood, this animate method is calling this new animation constructor. And this opens up a world of possibilities for us. And for example, you have access to all of these methods: pause, play, reverse, finish, cancel. The most interesting part is that you can do this at any given instance of time, like in the middle of an animation as well. And this is an exact code from the Web Animations API spec, that time may be shifted backwards and forwards, scaled, reversed, paused, and repeated. I know, this sounds too technical, right? You might be like, hey, Ishan, what's the big deal? It's just an API. Why are you so hyped about it? So let me try to answer that with this. How many of you are Marvel fans over here? Marvel movies, MCU. Thank God. Black Panther got released today. Why are you attending this talk? I'm a big Marvel fan. And a few weeks ago, I was watching this TV show called Moon Knight. And this is when one of my designer friends reached out to me. She's sitting right over there. She saw this particular scene and she was like, dude, can we recreate this in the web? And being a web guy who has been working in the web for 8 years, I was like, oh yeah, of course we can. Although I was pretty clueless, I had no idea how to do it. And this is where Web Animations API came to the rescue. I'll share the CodePen link later. I didn't get the time to actually, go through the code. But you click on Khonshu basically over here, that was one of the characters. Again, if you're a non-Marvel fan, please watch Marvel movies. You click on that and this thing happens. And now another thing, this is apple.com/macOS page. Big Sur update, this was 2 years ago. And the moment I saw this page, I was so fascinated with it. So basically the animation that you just saw, right? The moment you're scrolling down your page, this is what shows up. And I was so fascinated. I was like, dude, how did they do this? How can we create something like this? So let's try to first of all break it down. Let's see how this is happening. Let's try to create this animation over and over. So the first thing that I need is a MacBook or an image of a MacBook. So I have a PNG, and then there's another window which is coming from the top left. By window again, I mean a PNG, an image. And then there's another window which is fading in and zooming out from the bottom right. This notification panel slides in from the top right. And this thing which fades in from the bottom left. Now, if you notice one thing closely, right, this is not a single animation. These are 4 different animations, but since they are happening since all of these are happening together, it just gives you this immersive effect. So basically, this is a sequence of animations. Now, how do we recreate this? Now, as a developer, right, we can of course create this using the same thing that we just wrote, Web Animations API. But things might get little bit complicated because now you have to maintain state and all these variables and everything. Like when that particular window is right over here in 50%, then animate the next one. So it gets tricky. So what you need is you need a conductor, not the electricity one which can conduct electrons and not Tom, but someone who can play an orchestra. So like these sequence of animations. And this is where libraries like GreenSock and Motion One come into the picture. One thing that they have in common, by the way, is this timeline object. Well, now, what is this timeline object? This timeline object can accept a sequence, or that array that you saw, right, the keyframes one. It can accept a sequence of animations. It can do pretty cool things. And remember, I told you that animation constructor was super cool. This is why, because the animation constructor can actually accept 2 things. One is effect, which is keyframe effect, which we just wrote, and the second thing it accepts is a timeline. So whenever you're creating any animation, including a CSS animation or JavaScript apps animation, your browsers have actually this document.timeline, which tells you the amount of time that you have spent on a particular page. You can actually go into Chrome console right now, and you can actually check this out and inspect in the console. It's pretty cool. But so by default, every animation uses the document or timeline. But GreenSock has this particular plugin called Scroll Trigger, which basically replaces the timeline with something called Scroll Trigger Timeline. And that's how you get those animations which are synchronized with your scroll bar. Now, sometimes in your products, you might want to go for a rather plug-and-play option instead of writing everything from scratch. This is where GIFs come to the rescue. But they have a lot of limitations, right? Like the file size is too high, and they always have a low resolution because they are raster-based and not vector-based. So one possible solution is using something like Lottie files, or recently there has been some hype about Rive as well. It's another thing. It's very famous in Flutter, but they are adding web support as well. That's something we can look into. These are vector-based, first of all. That means they are scalable, and they don't really take up a lot of space. It's less like you can just use a JSON SVG and you can animate those. Now, coming to the next part, we are right on time. What's next, the future? So we started back with 1987, right, with GIFs, how everything came into the picture, to SMIL, and CSS animations, and then transitions. And then we looked at the Web Animations API, then GSAP, and libraries like Motion One as well. And although there's so much more to cover, but let's just take a moment to appreciate how far we have come across, like in just last 20 or 30 years. And maybe let's just take a look at where we are headed. So this is something which was announced last year in Google I/O. So Chrome developers, they are actually working on this experimental API called the Page Transitions API. Basically, whenever you're navigating between any two pages, you can actually animate those elements. So right now, if you follow material design guidelines, if you're an Android developer, you already have access to this, but there's nothing like this on the web. And this is something they're working on. If you have Chrome 104 or later, Chrome Canary, you can actually enable this particular flag and you can play around with this. Once this gets rolled out, adding page transitions in your application will be as simple as just adding this particular code block. You can still do this with using libraries like Frame and Motion, but it just involves a lot of manual work. And yeah, something we didn't talk about today was 3JS and WebGL. To put it in layman terms, it's like 3D animations, all those cool graphics that you see on the internet. And perhaps we can talk about this some other day, because the constraint of time we couldn't cover this. Another important thing which we didn't cover today was accessibility. I know as a web developer, whenever we see those like glitch effects or that cool lightning effect with Thor or whatever, we're like, oh dude, this is so cool. I spent so much time on this. I should just add this, right? But you should always remember the core fundamental principle is that why we are doing all of this is because of user delight, right? And at the end, you should always ensure that all of your potential users, including people with disabilities, can always have a decent user experience and are able to easily access your information. You shouldn't overdo it. Like, of course, add animations only for delight, not just because you can do it. But again, since we are short on time, maybe let's just take this up on some other day. And with that, we have reached the end. I hope it's pronounced Nandri. I had thank you over here. In case you have any questions or any feedback, please feel free to connect with me. I'll be there in the networking lodge as well, or you can connect with me on these handles. And before I go, there is one more thing. One of my friends forced me to do this. I think this is the second time I'm in Chennai. And in case you have any recommendations for good South Indian food, please scan that QR code and share those with me on WhatsApp. Thank you so much. I hope you're having a good day. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thanks, Ishan.